Hello, everyone. I hope that everyone can hear me. Welcome and thank you for participating in this webinar. So we, the Scientific Cooperation Department, are really pleased to welcome you here in IFI, Institut Français d'Indonésie. Before starting, let me give you a few words about our actions. So the Scientific and Technological Cooperation Department of Institut Français d'Indonésie organizes various popular science events for the general public. On the schedule, we usually have many conferences, exhibitions, scientific activities, dissemination of documentaries and scientific films, videos, podcasts, etc. So the purpose of this scientific communication is to offer the wide audience a vision of science in the making, to foster the encounters of researchers, politicians, professionals with the public in order to establish a real dialogue. More specifically, scientific events generally focus on promoting French-Indonesian cooperation in research. So targeting an ever wider audience, popular science events not only inform the public about the state of cooperation or nurture their scientific curiosity through different approaches, but also create new cooperation opportunities between France and Indonesia. So let's talk about today's webinar. So we will focus on a subject that we believe everyone can relate to, the famous, or maybe we should say infamous COVID-19. And more specifically, we will focus on the pandemic fatigue, its definition, its causes, its manifestations, and more. To talk about the subject, we have the pleasure of welcoming three great speakers, Mrs. Enrilia Emma Ningdia, Mrs. Nova Rianti Yusuf, and Mrs. Supriya Besbarwa. Thank you, dear speakers, for participating. The moderation will be ensured by Mr. Koimam Zulfikar, who I will present you in a few seconds. Before starting the conference, I would like to give you a few technical details. Each speaker will have 15 minutes to tell us about a certain aspect of the general subject and answer questions asked by the moderator. After the presentation time, we will take the question asked by the audience. Please, dear audience, ask all of your questions in the chat box of your Zoom app, following the format name, city, country, and then ask your question. You are welcome to ask all of your questions all along the conference, and they will be answered at the end. Okay, now enough with the details. Let's start the conference. I will give the floor in a few seconds to our moderator, Mr. Koimam Zulfikar, but before, a few words about him. Koimam is graduated in Bachelor of Medicine and is now continuing the medical doctor profession education in Jemur Sari Islamic Hospital, Surabaya. He is working in the Student Health Service Center in Darul Ulum, Jombang. He is chairman of Nahdlatul Ulama Medical Student Association. In addition, he is interested in the field of research, volunteering, foreign languages, leadership, organization, and public speaking. And amongst his many participations in different contests and prizes, we are really happy to say that he represented Indonesia in La Semaine des Jeunes Talents Scientifiques in France, which is a beautiful illustration of the French-Indonesian cooperation. Koimam, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Madame Myriam Maret. Bonjour à tous, bonsoir. My name is Koim. Welcome to Institut Français Indonesia's webinar. I am a medical student of Universitas Nahdlatul Ulama Surabaya, or UNUSA, and from Nahdlatul Ulama Medical Student Association, or NUMSA. And welcome to today's webinar on what is pandemic fatigue and how does it manifest in Indonesia. This webinar is for public to address questions you have about pandemic fatigue, starting from definition, strategies on population, prevalence of affected populations, pathophysiology or brain mechanism involved in this disease, the clinical signs and symptoms, the treatment or remedy, and etc. This webinar will be held in English, and will be finished approximately 7:40 p.m. on Western Indonesian time. Today we have three special speakers, Dr. Supriya Bisbarwa, Dr. Nova Rianti Yusuf, and Madam Andrelia Ningdia, PhD. Good evening and bonsoir in French. Let me deliver the CV of all the speakers. Dr. Supriya Bisbarwa. She is currently Technical Officer, Risk Communications for Public Health Emergency with the World Health Organization, Region Office for Southeast Asia, or WHO CRO. Correct me if I'm wrong. She has 20 years experience in risk communication for policy advocacy for public health and science, mostly in WCRO, which she joined in early 2005. She also has technical and project management experience and was the project manager for WHO CRO for Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework, or PIP, from 2014 to 2016. Further, as consultant for CRO from February to September 2018, she continued to support CRO in influenza and PIP project management from 2016 to 2017. She moved as Senior Director for New York-based International Health Communication Consultancy, Global Health Strategies, or GHS, and worked with clients like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on communication for immunization and maternal and child health in India and Southeast Asia. Supriya has PhD in cell biology from University College, University of London, and Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from King College, University of London. She also has a Master in Public Health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and certificate in Project Management from Duke University, USA. Say bonsoir, Dr. Supriya Bisbarwa. Good evening from Indonesia. How are you?
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. And good evening. Selamat malam.
Selamat
Is that how
malam.
you say? Selamat malam.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's my great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're happy to see you, Doctor. And we continue for our second speaker today, Dr. Nova Rianti Yusuf. She is psychiatrist born in Palu, Central Sulawesi, Indonesia. She is an Indonesian author of 8 books since 2003. One of her book entitled Mahadewa Mahadewi. She often called herself Noriyu, Dr. Noriyu. She was a member of House Representative of Democratic Party for 2014 to 2019 period. During her term as representative, she supported the mental health law. She completed a research fellow diploma mental health in implementation research, Department of Global Health and Social Medicine, Harvard Medical School, Boston, USA. And on July 2019, Nova got a doctorate in public health from the Faculty of Public Health of University of Indonesia. And in 2016, she was profiled in Saturday Profile of the New York Times with title Freeing Mental Ill of Stigma and Change, United States. And in 2020, she was a national finalist for Indonesia, the Asian US Science Prize for Women 2020, organized by USAID, US Asian Connect, and Asian. Recently, she won Outstanding Alumni Award for 55th anniversary Trisakti University. Please welcome to our second speaker today. Say bonsoir to Dr. Nova Rianti Yusuf or Dr. Noriyu. Bonsoir, Doctor. Selamat petang.
Bonsoir, how are you today?
I'm fine. And you?
Well, so far so good.
Okay. So we are happy to see you, Doctor.
Yep, likewise.
Okay. We continue to our third speaker today, Madam Andrelia Ningdia, PhD. She is psychologist, more than 18 years of experience. She handles psychological cases in area of child adolescence development, the formation of behavior in the sphere of individual and organization, as well as the development of human resources. She started as a career as a researcher and academic staff at university, who later found that the world of practice was more satisfying to her mind. Founder of Magna Penta, a psychology consultant, her current activities are practicing in hospital and at Magna Penta Consulting, as well as being a lecturer in Master of Professional Psychology program at Universitas 17 Agustus 1945 or UNTAK in Surabaya. Actively researching as part of responsibility to realize an evidence-based approach in the practice of psychology. In 2009, she completed her master's degree in educational management in University of Western Australia. And in 18, she got Doctor of Philosophy in Psychology from James Cook University. Please welcome to our third speaker today, Madam Andrelia Ningdia, PhD. Bonsoir, selamat petang.
Bonsoir, good evening. Hi,
Good
thank you,
evening.
Koimam. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So happy to see you here.
Yes, so great to see you.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, they will answer several questions on PowerPoint, and in the final session, they will answer questions from you all participants. So please feel free to ask questions during today's presentation using the chat box which is below the Zoom section of your dashboard with the format name, underline city, underline country, and underline your questions, because our participants come from several countries. Well, we'll try to get through questions as many as possible, depend on the limit of time. And we have 15 minutes for each speaker to explain and deliver their words. So let's begin. On commence. For the first speaker, Dr. Supriya Besbarwa. Are you ready, Doctor? Sorry, your microphone. Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Okay. So we have some questions for you that can be answered through the PowerPoint you have. So the first question is, can you tell us what is pandemic fatigue in general definition? And when did the pandemic fatigue manifest itself internationally and in Indonesia? And what are strategies at the national level to put in place to avoid the pandemic fatigue in the population? That is, Dr. Supriya, time is yours.
Thank you very much. I will try my best to answer those questions. And once again, good evening. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. As Graham Mums said, I lead on risk communication and community engagement with WHO Southeast Asia region. And it has been my pleasure to work with many countries in this region, including Indonesia, which I have had the pleasure to visit many times, and I just love, especially the food. But more seriously, I've been working on COVID-19 in the community engagement part, and we've all seen the impact of it in all of our lives. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about how we can beat pandemic fatigue. But first of all, the question you asked, what is pandemic fatigue? So 2020, I think all of us will agree that our lives turned upside down. As The Economist, the famous news magazine put it, the world shut down, essentially. You had lockdowns one after another. Everyone started wearing masks. You couldn't go near people. Instead, the way you communicated, like we're doing now, is through computers, but that assumes that you have access to internet and computers and all that. You had to stay away from people and essentially do the opposite in many ways of things that we are used to doing, which was not easy at all. So pandemic fatigue, what is it? It's demotivation. Now, I know the presenters following me will also probably give a more clinical aspect to it, but I'm talking about pandemic fatigue from the overall public health point of view, which is demotivation to follow recommended protective behaviors, whether it's about washing hands, whether wearing a mask, whether about keeping distance. This demotivation emerges gradually over time. It's not right at the beginning. And it's affected by a number of emotions, experiences, and perceptions. It's not just one thing, but a complex issue. It's also affected by cultural, structural, and the legislative environment. Now, what do I mean by that? What happens to all of us in the initial phase of a crisis? You get this surge of adrenaline, you have great motivation and you do what you need to do because you want to get over the crisis, right? But as the situation prolongs, what happens is people, then the novelty and the new thing it becomes a part of our life. What was, even if it's dangerous, it's new, it becomes a part of our life and people start becoming complacent. And then the way you need to be, the new way of being gets more difficult because people go back to habits, old beliefs, and social factors also play a thing. For a few days, you'll be okay if you don't go to work, but if in the long term it affects your life, your livelihood, your family, then you start thinking that it's probably not worth it. It's not worth staying away. And also, what this pandemic has done is, asked us to keep away from some of the basic human instincts. We are social animals, and yet we have to stay away from other people. We cannot go socialize anymore. And that's asking a lot to do it, do it over a long time. Short time, yes. But now you think, when is the end? How long does it go on? Then people get demotivated. Then there's also, it depends from situation to situation, where there's a large number of cases, the fear factor is still there. But where there are fewer cases, you think, oh, it's going to be okay, I'm safe, and you're less likely to be taking it seriously. The environment also plays a role. What kind of support you're getting. What is your neighborhood like? Many issues there. And studies have shown that pandemic fatigue is usually associated with younger age. This is not a study in Indonesia, it's in many other countries, but mainly Western countries. But it shows that it's associated with younger age. Also, negative experience of the past and perceived low risk of COVID-19, negative experience of taking up protective measures like wearing a mask or whatever, and also low risk of COVID-19. So what are some of the reasons for pandemic fatigue? What makes people get fatigued and not follow protective behavior? This is a basic behavior change model presented by a psychologist at University College London called Susan Michie. And what she says is people's behaviors are affected by their individual capability, and what they believe to be they're capable of. The opportunity is not capability enough, is not enough to push into behavior. They have to have the right conditions and opportunity as well, all of which feed into motivation. And that leads to protective behavior, or not, in the case may be for now. So what happens in the case of pandemic fatigue? It depends on the person's what's called self-efficacy, his own judgment of how capable he or she is, the awareness of the situation. People who are not as aware are less likely to follow protective behaviors. The health literacy, how aware are they about health? And also their mental condition. Are they stressed? Are they, what are they feeling? Then there's the social, which is the opportunity is social, cultural norms, where you might want to wash your hands, but it's access. Do you have access to water? Can you afford to buy a mask? There's peer expectations as well. As I said, we're social animals. So people feel, oh my God, I look horrible in that mask. I'm not going to wear it. Oh, I know we're not supposed to go to that party, but maybe people will feel bad if I don't go to her 21st birthday party. So you go anyway, even though you're not supposed to be. Then there's rules and regulations. If you're going to be fined for not wearing a mask, then you will probably think twice about it. Then also what the situation is like in the workplace and school. Then there's the individual motivation. How difficult is it to follow those measures, hardship experienced, whether it's convenient or not, your emotions, whether you perceive the threat to be as high as it actually is, or do you think you'll be okay if you don't think so? All of these are factors that lead to either taking up protective behavior or, in this case, pandemic fatigue. So the next question is, when did pandemic fatigue set in? That's a difficult question to answer because it depends on the context. As you know, globally, there have been different waves at different times. And in Europe, which after China and the Asia Pacific, Europe got the first wave very early. And by quite early in 2020, they were in lockdown, and then they got quite tired, and pandemic fatigue behaviors appeared by around summer. So, you know, people started being less careful about wearing a mask or keeping distance, and they would go and meet people and have parties and all that. What about in this region? This is data from YouGov.com, which does surveys across the world. But the caveat is this is online surveys. So people who don't have access to social media or internet may not be reflected here. These are 3 countries in WHO Southeast Asia region. As you can see, this is from April 2020 to April 2021. Initially, there was a sharp rise as cases rose in refraining from touching objects in public, and then it decreased. In the case of India, it sort of decreased here. In Thailand, in the case of Thailand, this is the one, it decreased around October last year, and then started increasing again as the cases increased. And you can see Indonesia here, it peaked in early April 2020, but it was fairly good. Then in January 2021, it reduced a little bit. So it's around that time, perhaps, that you can say maybe pandemic fatigues would have set in a bit. Then wearing masks, again, we go to YouGov data. There's really not such a decrease in any of the 3 countries, except perhaps India, where it decreased a lot in April 2021. And then once the cases, we had terrible rise in cases, then it started going up again. But Indonesia, it has been, except for a short dip here in January 2021, it's been fairly consistent. Washed hands with soap and water, I could not find consistent data across from right up to April 2021, but I did get it from 1st April to 1st October. And it's been pretty consistent throughout. The dark blue is people who said they wash their hands always. And that's quite a lot. That's 70%. And it's been pretty consistent. In the first one that I'm talking about is Indonesia, but also in India. It's been pretty consistent, but in Thailand, it has gone down a bit. So it's difficult to say exactly when pandemic fatigue has set in, but perhaps earlier this year, you can say. So how can you address pandemic fatigue? That was your next question. We often feel that, you know, if people are not wearing masks, not washing hands, not keeping distance, and they're socializing, we'll just do, it's naturally instinctive to say, oh, we'll have more public communication, and you have more TV ads and more radio ads, and repeat the whole thing again. But it doesn't really work, because it's not that people don't know. It's a number of issues that have led to the fatigue. It's the emotional state, it's the perception. So you also need to make it convenient to get people more motivated to follow protective behaviors.
Sorry, Doctor.
Not just tell them.
5 minutes more.
Oh, okay. I'll try and hurry up. So how can we do this? Now, WHO in Europe has come up with 4 key strategic approaches to beat pandemic fatigue. One is to understand people, to listen. What is it that they want? What is it that's affecting them? Then the second is to engage people as part of the solution, not be, okay, we are, as the government we're telling the people, but be, ask them, what do you think is the solution? Because it's their lives that are being affected. And when people are involved and feel they have a stake in it, they're more likely to respond because it's their lives that's reflected. The third is, as has happened, we're more than 16 months into the pandemic. Is there any way that we can live lives, but with reduced risks? Are there things we can do so that the risk is not so high, but we still go back to what is instinctively normal for us? We can still meet people. How can we do that? And fourth is acknowledge and address the hardship people experience, because it has been very hard for a lot of people. Businesses have shut, people have lost jobs. So what do we mean by understanding people? Understand those who are most affected, understand what motivates them, whether by focus group discussions, talking to them, feedback in various ways, and then use those findings to understand what their perceptions of the pandemic are, and then inform policy decisions accordingly, as well as communication. Then think of new initiatives that might work to motivate people, and communicate also the research agenda to the research community. What are the needs, priorities, and knowledge gaps? Secondly, engage people as part of the solution, as I said. Engage civil society organizations and find creative ways of motivating their members and peers. As I said, peers are one way that people, we're essentially social animals. So when we see others doing something, we're also more motivated to do it. Get people to use commitment contracts, for example, say, okay, I pledge to follow this, so that they have a commitment and they feel, obliged to follow that commitment. Enlist trusted voices, because, in a crisis, people only listen to people they trust. Focus on strengthening self-efficacy, which is, a can-do attitude. Not that the pandemic controls us, but our behavior controls the pandemic. So people feel more positive and motivated instead of demotivated. And seek to inspire as well as inform. As scientists, we tend to inform, but really people need inspiration. Excuse me. Thirdly, allow people to live their lives, but reduce risk. It's important to follow, get back people that they follow their normal lives, but then there is a risk. So are there small ways in which we can reduce the risk, but still feel like normal? I put in this picture of a wedding so that you can still go ahead with a wedding, but keep distance, for example. For the government, maybe they can look at how they can reduce transmission and yet carry on with life. And then involve people, get ideas from different sectors, whether it's the transport sector, the retail sector, for things that affect them, for big festival seasons, big events, which will affect them all, and say, okay, we want to be safe, but we don't want to shut down, but we want to make sure that everyone's safe. What should we do? So if you work together with everyone, then there might be better ideas coming up. And shift the whole messaging from do not to do. And, judgment and blame has a way of even further demotivation. So that should be avoided. And finally, acknowledge and address people's hardship. People have suffered in this pandemic. And to acknowledge them is to give them courage in a way. And also try and identify those hardships. You know, for example, one of the reasons people don't report if they have COVID is then they'll have to go into isolation. If they have to go into isolation, they may lose their jobs. So they'll say, oh, it's nothing, it's just a little sore throat, I'm fine, and not get tested. But if you acknowledge the difficulties they might have and find ways of addressing them, for example, you know, if a mother with a young child is isolated, if there are ways to help her to make sure her child is looked after, then she's more likely to come up and follow the, sort of admit to that. So then reduce the cost of sustained protective behaviors. Again, it comes back to your life. You know, if long-term you have a lot of losses, if there's some way that you can reduce that, reduce the cost of, say, wearing a mask every day. You know, a poor person might not be able to afford it. If you can reduce the price or make it more accessible, that will have a more motivating factor. Then, while taking into account epidemiological risk, see if difficult to follow restrictions can be balanced with other measures. For example, if you will have loss of income due to lockdown, can that be? So this is more for policymakers. Find ways for people to use their time in beneficial manners. If you are unemployed or you're in lockdown and can't go into work, just not having anything to do can be very depressing for people. So instead, if they can go, say, for an online career development course or something that can be used in a beneficial manner, that's also motivating for people. And then include economy and health in communication, not economy versus health or health versus economy, because we have to look at life overall. Cross-cutting principles for policymakers across the board is to be transparent, to be fair, to be consistent, have a coordinated approach with all sectors, and be as consistent and predictable as possible in policies so that people feel more secure and can plan their lives better. So most of what I've talked about today is in this document called Pandemic Fatigue, developed by WHO Regional Office for Europe. It gives very good guidance, and here's the link if you want to know more about it. It's, of course, targeted more at policymakers and others, but it's very clear, and it gives the whole issue of pandemic fatigue. And I hope with that I've answered the 3 questions that you've asked, and I hope I'm also within time, or at least not much over. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for Dr. Pesbarwa. Thank you so much for your answer and the illustration you have been seen, Dr. Thank you so much. And for all the participants here, please feel free to ask questions during today's presentation using the chat box, which is below the Zoom section of your dashboard with the format name, underline city, underline country, and your questions. So thank you again, Dr. Supriya Pesbarwa, and we continue for the second speaker today, Dr. Nova Rianti Yusuf, or Dr. Noriu. Hello, Doctor. Are you here right now? Are you ready? Hello?
Hi, Koi Mom, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So we have some question for you, Doctor.
Is it clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, I already received the questions, and I already sent my presentation earlier today.
Okay. So we have some questions for you, and that can be answered through the presentation you have. So we have several questions. So how is pandemic fatigue manifest in Indonesia? Who is most affected by this pandemic fatigue in Indonesia, with the type of population and age group? And what are the brain mechanisms involved in this type of depression? And how to treat or remedy this depression? How to prevent it on a daily basis, and how to treat it then? So, Doctor, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Koi Mam. Merci beaucoup. I'm so happy to be invited here as one of the speakers tonight with other distinguished guests. And I think my presentation, although it's more on individual level or country level, but somehow it resonates with the explanation that was being presented by Dr. Supriya earlier. So I guess we can slide to the next slide. Thank you very much. So Dr. Supriya already explained about what is it exactly? What do you mean by pandemic fatigue? It is a natural and expected reaction to unprecedented circumstances. So at the beginning of a crisis, it seems like me, not me including part of the people who seem to be able to adapt mentally and physically, because it was for short-term survival. So it was acutely stressful situation. But however, because it's unprecedented, the circumstances keeps dragging on, that means we have to adopt a different style of coping. Otherwise, it will end up in results such as fatigue or demotivation, as explained by Dr. Supriya earlier. It's very important, however, that pandemic fatigue can pose a serious threat to effort to control the spread of the virus. And why is that? Because until effective treatments or vaccine are available or certain coverage of vaccine rollout being achieved in countries, that means public support and effective behaviors remain as critical effort for containing the virus. Next slide. Okay, so I try to explain better about what is pandemic fatigue like. Okay, we wrestle with intense emotions every day. It drains your energy, but how will it look like? So the fatigue can stem from a number of emotions that you've experienced during the pandemic. For instance, you sense fear, anxiety, loneliness, hopelessness. And specifically for adolescents, I might add up two more dimensions, burdensomeness and belongingness, because it was part of my dissertation research. And it is very clear that the adolescents are facing challenges with the distant learning process. So that's why they feel like they are becoming more of a burden to the parents, and also they need to belong to a certain peer group, but they are unable to do that directly, but have to do it by social distancing. So the hallmark sign of pandemic fatigue is a sense of inner weariness. You may also feel helpless, not all the time, but sometimes you feel helpless, you feel sad, you're worried, you're frustrated, you're irritable. And this is very interesting. You may notice that you eat or sleep more or less than usual. You have trouble focusing. We call it brain fog these days. You feel edgy or nervous. You snap at or argue with others, particularly when you have a bad internet reception, and you will snap at the internet provider. Lack motivation, you're unable to stop racing thoughts, and sometimes you withdraw from others. So let's see on the next slide. Pandemic fatigue is not depression. So if you talk about depression in the sense of major depressive disorder, it is a mood disorder. So we are using the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. DSM-5 is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder. So when we talk about depression, the individual must be experiencing 5 or more symptoms during the same 2-week period. And at least one of the symptoms should be either 1, depressed mood, or loss of interest or pleasure. So the difference here is the pandemic fatigue can come as waves. It comes and goes. But when we talk about depression, as in major depressive disorder, the mood disorder, the symptoms must remain for 2-week period. So that will be the difference between pandemic fatigue and depression. And as you can see here, some of the symptoms are depressed mood, diminished interest or pleasure. So if you can still binge watch Netflix or other streaming platforms, then you're pretty much okay. Significant weight loss when not even dieting, or weight gain, or decrease or increase in appetite, slowing down of thought and reduction of physical movement, fatigue or loss of energy, feeling of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, diminished ability to think or concentrate, or you're being indecisive, recurrent thoughts of death, recurrent suicidal ideation without a specific plan or a suicide attempt, or a specific plan for committing suicide. To receive a diagnosis of depression, the symptoms must cause two things. One, the individual clinically significant distress, or impairment in social, occupational, and or other important areas of functioning. So that's the difference. There was a question, Koimam, about whether pandemic fatigue is depression. Okay, next. But however, we want to prevent the pandemic fatigue to become a burnout. Usually it's an occupational burnout. As you can see here, burnout is also not listed as a diagnosis in the diagnostic manual, but it is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress, as in the unprecedented circumstances of pandemic that we have been facing since last year. There are three key dimensions. One, overwhelming exhaustion. You may feel a little bit of cynicism, depersonalized. Usually you're concerned or kind, and suddenly you change and you become someone who is cynical. Detachment from the job and a sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. So if you see here on the right hand side of the slide, there was a research being done by Gallup last year among the employees in the United States. As you can see here, the percentage of employees who feel burnt out at work very often or always, if you compare between work from home all the time and work from home part of the time, you can see that it is the burnout percentage is higher when you work from home all the time, because it's not a choice, you are being domesticated. So that's the difference. And apparently the survey shows that a person will feel more burnout when you are entitled. You have to stay at home all the time to work. Okay, next slide. So how is pandemic fatigue manifested in Indonesia? Well, if we try to understand the definition of pandemic fatigue itself. So I tried to pick one or two statements made by the spokesperson of COVID-19 National Working Committee, Professor Wiku Adisasmito. So this was streamed on YouTube channel on December 3rd, 2020. As you can see here, there's a decrease in compliance with health protocols during November 2020, including a decrease in discipline in wearing masks, washing hands with soap and running water, and also social distancing or physical distancing. The community compliance rate for using a mask was 59.32%, and social distancing was 43.4%. While to reduce the number of COVID-19 cases, a compliance rate of 75% of the population is required. And out of 512 regencies or cities, less than 9 regencies or cities complied with the health protocols. Next slide. So I was being asked about the brain mechanism of pandemic fatigue. So I tried to propose this. This is also from WHO, Dr. Supriya.
Sorry, teacher, we have 5 minutes more. Thank you.
The theoretical model to understand the factors affecting behaviors. As you can see here, they are interconnected with one another. So the individual motivation can influence and be influenced by protective behaviors, while the protective behaviors can also be influenced and influence the contextual opportunity, and also the individual capability in terms of physical and psychological capability. So you can see here, they are all interrelated to one another, and they will affect how our behaviors are towards the COVID-19 protective behaviors. Okay, next slide. So I was also asked about the vulnerable age groups. I will show you the survey that was being done by Indonesian Psychiatric Association. So it was 5 months after the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic hit in Indonesia, because we started in March with the lockdown and the sort. So as you can see here, there were 4,010 respondents. 64.8% showed psychological distress. So what is the age group, the vulnerable age group? You can see from the red arrow, the psychological distress were mostly found in the age group of 17 to 29 years old and 60 or above years old. So as you can see here, there are two groups that are more vulnerable: the adolescent or young adults, and the elderly people. But specifically on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that 1 out of 5 thinks about suicide, prefers to die or having suicidal ideation. And the vulnerable age group was, again, among 18 to 29 years old. So it's not just about vulnerable age group, but also behavior, because it was theoretically related to behavior. So people to start to incorporate more risky behaviors back into their lives before the public health conditions have improved. So this is also the risk to pandemic fatigue. Next. This, I think this one resonates with what Dr. Supriya explained earlier. This is about the mindsets or habits that reinforce pandemic fatigue. When people hear about all of the things that they cannot do, it is also important for people to also hear what they can do instead of what they cannot do, particularly about things that are safe to do, to maintain options for people. So things that are important to them, but in a safe way. And secondly, children or adolescents or young adults, they have not been in classroom since March 2020. So it's been hard on the kids, it's been hard on families. So if returning kids to the classroom is one of the top societal priorities, then the government must think about how it can be done safely. It must be done safely. Next. So this is the last slide. So I was asked about how to cope with pandemic fatigue. So I'm giving, well, I'm sure you have read about this, how to cope from different, sources on the internet. You can easily find this, but I'm trying to incorporate 2 things here to prevent, and of course to manage the pandemic fatigue. One, I'm sure you've heard it again and again, take care of your body. It also happens to me, about getting enough sleep, how to get nutritious food, and how to put in daily exercise. It doesn't have to be a high impact kind of exercise, but it is something to keep you active, to keep you moving. So it will be good for your metabolism. And limit your news intake. Consume to once a day for an hour or less, and choose an accurate source of information. Please prevent cherry picking informations, because this can also cause you to feel anxious about the news if you don't get the bigger picture of the information that you receive. Manage your stress. I'm sure you've heard it again and again, Breathing exercise, you can easily find it on YouTube. You can find Thai Flow, how C tries to make people have a positive behavior by doing Tai Chi for 100 days. Only 5 minutes per day. And then you can do yoga, nature walks if you are close to nature, but even if you're not, you can make an effort to do so. Especially if not far from Jakarta, in Bogor areas, you can find a lot of waterfalls, and you can choose which one is safer and not crowded. Reading, watching a comedy. If you cannot laugh when you watch a comedy, then maybe it's an alarm. Re-engaging, refocusing. Re-engaging, for instance, when you are on a dining table with your family, try to focus more on that process or that situation, that circumstance, and you try to really enjoy the dish that you're having at the moment, like the texture, the smell, the aesthetic, and also refocusing. Refocusing is more like, for instance, you decide tonight, I want to relax, I want to wind down, I want to just watch something on Netflix, but try to focus on just doing that, because usually even when you watch any kind of streaming platform on TV, but on your cell phone, you are possibly watching the IGTV or something like that. So, or YouTube. So try to focus. And this is, I think this must be exercise. Connect with others. You can make phone calls. You can arrange video meetings. You can chat on social media in a positive way. Maybe you can send gifts, write letters, take a class online, or you can attend online religious services. Accept your feelings. It's very important to understand that human beings have range of express emotions. It is very normal. So you have appropriate effect between what you feel and what your gesture is like. So toxic positivity can be in the form of letting you know that you cannot be sad. Why are you sad? Other people don't feel sad because of that. You know, you cannot generalize like that. That can be a toxic positivity. While humans, they have range of express emotion. Maybe you can download mental health application from the Ministry of Health. You can download Sehat Jiwa. You can do consultation there with a clinical psychologist, with psychiatrists. That way you embrace your mental health and you try to get psychological first aid. Try positive self-talk. Instead of having all the negative thoughts, you can replace those thoughts. Instead of thinking, I will acquire COVID-19, and you replace it with, I'm trying to do my best to stay safe. And last one, you can create new traditions. You can do anything that makes you feel good physically, mentally, or emotionally. May it be a new hobby, a new routine, anything that makes you feel good. But somehow you need to have a more structured agenda. You have new traditions. So you have something to look forward to. Next, last one, I guess. Okay, so this is very important. Respite is a form of resilience. So we always function despite we are in the face of danger or in the face of challenge or negative life events, but somehow you are resilient. You can grow and you become better despite it's very challenging. So I think it's very important that I remind everyone here that respite is like you rest, you take care of yourself, you take enough sleep, you give yourself a break, you're being kind to yourself. So that is a simple form of resilience. So thank you. I'm sorry for the overtime. Koi Mam, this is, if you want to connect with me, you can send email to noryu.md@gmail.com. Thank you very much, Koi Mam.
Thank you so much, Dr. For your answer and the illustration you have been shown, Dr. And thank you for emphasizing us that pandemic fatigue is not a depression. So We have another speaker today, and before that, for all the participants here, please feel free to ask questions during today's presentation using the chat box which is below the Zoom section of your dashboard with the format name, underline city, underline country, and underline your question. So we have our special speakers again today. We have our third speaker, Madam Andrelia India, PhD. Hello, Madam.
Hello. Hi, Mom. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm still here.
Yes. Okay. So are you ready for your explanation? So we have some
Yes.
questions for you, and it can be answered through the presentation you have. And this is the questions. So what are the clinical signs of pandemic fatigue in patients? And can you talk about depression linked to the pandemic and how to treat or what is the remedy of this and how to prevent it on a daily basis and how to treat it then? So this is your speech. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me first share my slide. Please do let me know if you can see it. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's sure.
Okay, thank you then. So good evening again, everyone. It's thank you very much for the kind invitations that I can join and share with you. I hope this session will be beneficial for you. So I am Andrelia India from the Indonesian Psychological Association, the HIMSI. You can just call me by my first name, Andre. I am now coordinating the SEJIWA, which is the Psychological Service for Mental Health. Someone has asked about this in the chat room, so it will be, I think I will explain about it later. Hopefully she can stay here. So since Dr. Besbarua and Dr. Rianti have comprehensively explained about the definition of the pandemic fatigue, its manifestation in Indonesia, and then the mechanism involved, let me continue by highlighting the psychological aspects of stress, which underlie the development of the pandemic fatigue. I think this is important because all reactions of the signs, the symptoms that have already been discussed by Dr. Rianti before are actually what we call in psychology as a chronic stress. So let me jump into what I should be talking about, which is here. Okay, so as you know, I think you're very aware of the situation right now. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we see a lot of factors driving the distress. We have mass unemployment and economic uncertainty, and with the closures of schools and daycare facilities, many of us, just like me, are pulled between the words of work and then the responsibility to take care of family members, especially children in the West that I'm sure unimaginable previously. So adding to this burden, we feel increasingly isolated, making loneliness as a common complaint. I've seen several clients walking into my practice room complaining about these conditions, about how the pandemic fatigue, not only the pandemic fatigue, but the COVID-19 pandemic situation has heightened their anxiety level. So those experiences and challenges that we face during the COVID-19 pandemic are indeed objectively stressful. I have no doubt about it at all. So let me move into the next slide that tell about the dynamics of stress, strain, and burnout. Dr. Rianti has also touched about this topic as well very comprehensively, so I will just touch a little bit of the topic. So in addition, as you can see in the first box under the title of stress, chronic psychological stress can also emerge when we experience the demands of any situation as exceeding our coping resources. Like in our professional life, for example, we sometimes pose this question like, how can I stay focused with my work Zoom meeting when my kids are running into me asking for help about their online learning? Or I imagine that it can be even more stressful for you who have toddlers, who need much more attention, extra care, while you should maintain your professional work. So the demands of the situations and any other situations like this can exceed our coping resources. And when we do not have adequate resources, even if we think that we do not have adequate resources, situations and events can seem out of our control. This then leads to the development of strain, which is the second box. You can see we feel tension, both physically and psychologically. The degree of this tension will really depend on our subjective appraisal, on the degree of threats if the demands are not met. For example, if your job is very important because it supports your living, then any doubts to maintain your ability to work properly in times of the challenges right now will create more tensions for you. You started to think something like, will I go back to work? Or will I be able to afford my living if I cannot work? So at this moment, so much of our life feels out of control. And with this feeling comes the aversive state of stress. However, as human, we are highly resilient and we can actually adapt with this kind of difficult circumstances. You don't have to worry about it actually. Often we do this by trying to increase our coping resources. We have this kind of superpower within us that sort of emerges when we encounter a danger or a challenge. And this superpower gives us energy, makes us strong to help us deal with the acute stress. So in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic at the first wave, we might see that people were alert and ready to do protective behaviors to maintain their existence. Why? Because we want to live and we want to be able to conquer the virus that threatens our existence. So what happened to our body in that kind of circumstances follow the primitive reactions that are very tied to our emotions. We call this fight or flight responses. So the body has prepared us to deal with the danger in order to protect our lives. So in this kind of situation, a lot of cortisol being flooded into our system, that in one hand, it really helps the body respond to stress or danger and make us alert of the situation. But on the other hand, at the long run, if the situation persists, then it can be physically very exhausted. So when the aversive situation maintained over time, the physiology of stress, especially the dysregulation of the signaling pathways related to the hormone, which is the cortisol, can exert a negative impact on our bodies. So it explains what Dr. Rianti has already stated before about the prolonged stress. So in this situation, our body needs to adapt so that the prolonged stress mechanism doesn't bring more negative effect to our body. And one of the mechanisms has caused us to develop signs of pandemic fatigue. So once you understand about the mechanism that is undergoing on the phenomenon of the pandemic fatigue, I hope it will increase your awareness on which point you really need to work on and what kind of control you can exert in order to avoid or overcome the pandemic fatigue. So the critical point would be, I highlighted with red, the red arrow. So the critical point is the transition between the time when you feel the strain, the tension, sometimes we know, but in so many times we just ignore it, right? So when you feel the tension, the strain, and what you actually do to the situation will determine whether you will go into the positive or the negative coping mechanism. So physical pain like tension, strain, just like psychological pain, such as loneliness. Loneliness is a kind of psychological pain. They are actually warning signs that our body needs to be taken care of. So at this point, if you let the tension go higher and higher without realizing it or even without doing some constructive stress management, then the body will take care of you and run its rescue mechanism. Some of the mechanisms cause us to feel some of these signs. Individual differences might apply, but these are the common complaints of the fatigue. So some feel low of energy, restless, become more irritable, etc. And if the situation continues into several weeks or perhaps several months, another signs are usually coming, which are the decreased function of daily function. Daily living, your function in the daily living will be reduced, like either in the area of social interaction, work, or academic performances. So Dr. Arianti has also stated that pandemic fatigue is not depression. It's different in terms of MDD, major depressive disorder. But if you do not do anything to it, then the stress will go higher, your tension will go higher, and then your body will rescue you by doing some of activating some of these responses. So how then to overcome this condition? We obviously cannot make changes if we are not aware of what is going on within us. So increasing self-awareness is the first and the most important point for this. What should we be aware of then? You might question like that. We have to be aware of our tension, of the emotion, of our behavior, right? So the body is actually send us signals, but most of the time we just ignore the signs. When we're busy, it is very easy to overlook emotions and behaviors that are warning signs for us. Because tensions, both physical and psychological tension, are warning signs that our body needs to be taken care of. So when you feel like you really hit your emotional threshold, or you feel that you have reached your limit of tolerance, you actually can feel this, or someone around you can observe it, like you become even more irritable than before, you become sad all the time, feeling exhausted and so on. Please take some time to have a break and pay attention to what you're thinking and feeling within. This can be as short as a couple of minutes a day, I guess, as long as you be consistent with the emotional check-ins activity. So soon after that, start creating ways to recharge yourself. To recharge yourself. Okay, we are not like a super individual who always have the batteries on, right? We really need to recharge ourselves. So I also understand that we face several challenges in this situation because the ways that we usually have to recharge have been impacted by the pandemic situation. Like large gatherings are obviously restricted. And then for those who usually use traveling to overseas or other cities for the recharging activities, cannot do this option anymore. So creativity is needed within this situation. Just like Dr. Besberua explained to us, following the recommendation from the World Health Organization, I think we can and should now move on from do not to do it differently. So we cannot say now that we do not socialize, but we have to do socialization differently. It really sounds more human for today's reality, and you really have to think about it starting from now. So the next key point would be assessing your risk, because there's no clear end in sight about when the pandemic will be over. So understanding low and high risk activities, it is recommended.
Sorry, teacher,
yeah,
we have 5 minutes more.
Okay, great. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
So it is recommended that you think creatively to combat fatigue in safe ways. Dr. Rianti has also emphasis about the safe ways line. So creative action, do something in safe ways that minimize the spread of the virus and at the same time enable us to feel some sense of normalcy. Choose low to medium risk activities. Everyone will surely come up with different ideas, right, related to your own needs, your own circumstances. But whatever it is, I think it is really the time for you to think about those activities that fit your own context. So this is just one example of a simple way that you can assess your risk. It's a very basic one. And the basic idea is to decrease your risk factors and at the same time, do increase your protecting factors. So the strategies, including self-care strategies that I would like to show you after this, in managing the stress, the tension, aims to maintain an optimum level of emotion needed to motivate us to cope with the health threats that is still undergoing, right, until now. So the pandemic is not over. So moderate level of fear or anxiety is still needed, and the level is considered normal and necessary for the pandemic situation. So we don't want it to be too low that makes us not aware of the situation, but we also do not want it to be too high that triggers like high tension, which are also not healthy for our body. So we can maintain this optimum level of emotions by keeping our mental health foundation strong, develop areas of well-being, and building resilience. I will just highlight 1 or 2 points, and then later I will jump into the more practical and applicable technique that you can try on after this. So mental health foundations consist of 3 important aspects: physical, social, and occupational. Within the physical aspects, please ensure that you have enough sleep, consistently do a minimum of 60 minutes physical activities, and be mindful of what you eat and you drink, and also what's your substance use, such as nicotine and alcohol. So the second foundation of the mental health is socialization. Do maintain human interaction, use technology to stay connected, and be creative. That's my alarm, actually. Yes, let me go on a little bit more. So the third aspect of mental health foundation is the occupational aspect. We do work and maintain our regular activities to create meaning into our life. However, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we see and we feel that the boundaries are kind of blurred. Take mini breaks between activities, listen to your body, know if you already feel the tension, and do not ignore it, and do recharge yourself. So once you've answered, and at the right side of my slides, once you've answered that your foundations are strong, you can now start to take a look at developing other areas of well-being. So I've read that there are many suggestions on how to cope on the pandemic and pandemic fatigue, and it can be overwhelming, I can understand, if you try too many things at once. So my advice is start identifying what need, whether it is emotional, spiritual, or intellectual, which is more pressing, and try one technique at a time to assess if it helps you. And that is actually how you build up resilience. Learn more about the 4 major components of resilience, like building your connection, fostering wellness, embracing healthy thoughts, and finding purpose. Building connection has already been discussed under the socialization aspect of the mental health foundation. So fostering wellness is taking care of your body, just like Dr. Rianti has stated. We don't really know when the pandemic will end, and it is hard to be patient with this safety restriction, right? So make space for emotion. Learn how to relax yourself, because it's impossible to think logically 100% all the time, right? We are still human, we're not a robot. So learn techniques to relax. And in this session, I will just show you one technique which is scientifically sound. It is the Jacobson Progressive Muscle Relaxation, or the BMR. So embracing healthy thoughts. There are many, many things that are not within our control in this situation. So this kind of circumstances could leave us feeling angry or even frustrated. This can lead to criticism being directed toward ourselves or others around us, which actually may worsen our mood. So accept change and be kind to yourself. Finding purpose is suggested through the activity of being proactive and do one act a day to show kindness to yourself or others. Research has shown that this can help you feel happier, boost your immune system and energy level. So another indicator of resilience is the ability to understand your own limit in coping with stress. So seek help when you need it. Talk to someone you trust or to a professional if you have signs of pandemic fatigue that we have already discussed before. So talking and reaching out to people, having them listen to what you're going through, and also getting support that you need can help regulate your emotion and also reduce your stress. So let's practice now. I will just show you in a couple minutes about one of the self-care strategies that you can work on right after this. It's called Jacobson's Progressive Muscle Relaxation. Right after this, I will send in the Zoom chat room specific details on this PMR techniques. I will just highlight some important points just to let you know that this is very important for you to learn. So progressive muscle relaxation is a way to relieve muscle tension. It involves a series of activities, tightening and relaxing your muscle groups one at a time in a specific pattern. The goal is to release tension from your muscle while helping you recognize what the tension feels like. And if you practice this regularly, this technique may help you manage the physical effects of it. Why is it important, and why should we lower the physical tension? PMR comes from the basic idea that physical relaxation can promote mental relaxation. We need the state of relaxation, mental relaxation, in order to be able to give us more time to weigh up several options when we deal with stress. We want to make a better decision when we are in a stressful situation. So the PMR gives you that kind of time to buy in the times of difficulty. So you can relax a muscle by tensing and then releasing it. And then we also combine it with the deep breathing technique. The PMR provides a framework for achieving this state of relaxation. And mass body of research have extensively studied the efficacy of PMR, and the studies found that it helps reducing anxiety and tension, improving sleep, and also reducing physical pains. So I will just, this is just a glimpse into the activity, right? So tensing and then relaxing groups of muscles, and then combine it with the deep breathing technique, inhale and then exhale. Okay, I will just show you like 1 minute. Let me, Koima.
Yes, okay.
Okay, just to show you that you can use this as a guide, and then later I will send you through the Zoom chat. Let me stop first. Please let me know if you can hear the sound. Okay, it's just a sample, and then soon after that, you can find that the guidance will go into the specific muscle group. For example, muscle groups on your hand, on your foot, and then on the facial muscle, and so on. I will just send you at the chat room, and now I should continue. And when you already try to do the self-care strategies, but you still need to share your thoughts or your problems, especially when you feel that the tension is heating up and you start feeling that it's not good any longer, then start talking to someone you trust or to a professional for getting help and support. In Indonesia, we have a specific helpline to serve Indonesian citizens who need help regarding psychological problems. You can dial 119 extension 8, and our volunteers are ready to help you with the delivery of psychological first aid. I need another 2 minutes, Koiman. Is that okay if I show you the video about how Sejiwa operates?
Okay, maybe 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, yes, 1 minute just for the introduction. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Lokasi keberadaan Anda akan digunakan untuk layanan ini. 1 jika setuju, tekan 2 untuk melanjutkan. Untuk pelaporan krisis center corona, tekan 9. Tekan 8 untuk layanan konsultasi psikologi.
Then you press 8.
Layanan psikolog, selamat pagi, dengan Mona bisa dibantu?
Iya Mbak,
Halo, dengan Bapak siapa saya bicara saat ini?
saya dengan Alfian.
Pak Alfian, baik. Pak Alfian usianya berapa saat ini?
Usia saya
And then they will transfer
Oke, baik. Tentang corona.
mana Mbak? Karena sebelumnya saya masih bekerja dan bertemu banyak orang Mbak.
Baik, baik.
Itu baiknya bagaimana Mbak solusinya ya?
Baik, berdasarkan cerita dari Pak Alfian tadi,
Operator will
jadi saat ini Pak
transfer it
Alfian
to
sedang
our
mengalami
volunteers
kepanikan
to
yang
get
mendalam
help.
mengenai atau merasa takut ya Pak ya, dengan kondisi saat ini terkait juga corona yang memang sedang menyebar luas saat ini. Apakah betul saat ini Pak Alfian ingin berbicara dengan psikolog kami, Pak Alfian?
Iya betul Mbak.
Oke, baik. Jika begitu saya sambungkan dengan psikolog kami. Saat ini Pak Alfian jangan ditutup teleponnya, karena saya sambungkan langsung. Ditunggu, terima kasih Pak Alfian. Selamat pagi Bu Nelita, saya Mona dari 119. Saat ini saya sudah terhubung dengan Pak Alfian, usia 28 tahun dari Bekasi. Saat ini beliau sedang mengalami kepanikan dan rasa takut yang mendalam terhadap kondisi saat ini, Bu Nelita, begitu.
Baik, Mona silahkan hubungkan Pak Alfian dengan saya.
Untuk Pak Alfian, silakan langsung berkonsultasi ya dengan Bu Nelitanya.
Okay, that goes on until the delivery of the first psychological aid can be ended. Okay, I think that's all from me, and I'll be very happy to answer your questions and then discuss further about some of the materials that have been presented. I hand over the session to Poimam. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andre, for your explanation. And for the last slide, that's really, really great move for Indonesia for giving access for all the people in Indonesia. So let me take everything into account that pandemic fatigue is the motivation to follow recommended protective behaviors affected by cultural, social, structural, and legislative environment. On the other hand, it's a nature and expected reaction to sustain on unresolved adversity on population. And also it defined as a pandemic fatigue as a form of negative coping to chronic stress. And Dr. Norio also emphasized that this pandemic fatigue is not of depression. So specifically, it's not related to age, but also a behavior. And healthy way to cope with pandemic fatigue, such as giving good nutrition and then exercise, etc. And also we have to notice the signs and symptoms such as exhaustion, feeling restless, lack of energy, low mood, feeling constantly overwhelmed, increased irritability, and social isolations. And Dr. Andre also give like how to cope or manage this pandemic fatigue, such as keep your foundation strong and develop all the area of well-being and with your resilience. And they also she also give us the key concept of DMR. So ladies and gentlemen, we are finished our today's speech. And we are very, very happy and grateful for our special speakers today. Thank you so much for Dr. Pesbarwa, Dr. Norio, and Dr. Andre. It is a really pleasure. And, the speakers today is really amazing. This capturing the webinar so perfectly, for giving easy explanation, flowing, and full of meaning. Now we are moving to our question and answer session or Q&A. Anyway, it's a really, really huge response for our participants. So I already choose several questions related to this topic. So maybe our speaker already answered on the chat box, but maybe we can emphasize via in our speech today. So we starting from the Shafa from Kudus, Indonesia. So it is already answered in the presentation, but maybe we can emphasize again about this. So why is fatigue associated with younger age only? Does that mean people of older age are more durable and adaptable for pandemic fatigue? Maybe among three of speakers can answer, starting from Dr. Supriya.
Thank you. Pandemic fatigue actually affects everyone, not just the young. But what the definition that we use of pandemic fatigue, which is demotivation to take up protective behaviors like wearing a mask or washing hands or keeping distance. Some studies in some countries have shown that that is more prevalent in younger people, not that it's not there in other things. And that could be for, well, many reasons. One of them is that when COVID initially struck, although it affected elder people more seriously, and younger people, if infected, would usually not be as serious. So perhaps there's a perception, and I'm saying perhaps here, but I don't know, that younger people feel that they're less vulnerable. And also perhaps, being younger, you're also more likely to be going out, to be socializing, and you want to do that. So possibly those are some of the reasons. It's the risk perception also. So the lifestyle could be some of the reasons why they're more likely to be not taking up protective measures. But it's not that it's only for younger people, it's much older. It's across all ages, it can affect anyone. Over.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Supriya. And how about Dr. Norio in the psychiatric spectrum? What's your opinion about this question? Can you turn on the microphone? Thank you.
Yeah, I forgot. Okay, so to follow up on what Dr. Supriya answered, I agree that younger people are more prevalent to pandemic fatigue, but it can happen to anyone, regardless of age. Somehow this is correlated to my research, my dissertation research on, it's actually funded by WHO also. So it was in 2019. The research was to find out about the risk factor of suicidal ideation among adolescents. So I discovered the significant dimensions. They were loneliness, hopelessness, belongingness, and burdensomeness. So I can only imagine that during the pandemic, with the restriction of not being able to go to school and not being able to be with their friends, their peers, I can only imagine all these dimensions are somewhat being amplified in the pandemic. So that's why it is more prevalent, but I don't think there is longitudinal research about this one in Indonesia. But yeah, I'm actually using my previous research and try to reflect this in the pandemic situation. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Norio, for the answer. And we continue for Dr. Andri, maybe in the psychological dimension, what do you think about this question?
Yeah, from the psychological perspective, I think this can be explained by the psychological characteristics of being teenager itself. So oxytocin levels are at its highest level during early adolescence, and this oxytocin makes socialization very important for them. So oxytocin level triggers you to do socialization. It's part of the teenagers or young people's life. And with the restriction during the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, you can see that they cannot do socialization as they do previously. And also being a teenager means that their way of thinking is not yet developed 100% the same with the adults, although the development of the brain has already reached its maximum level. However, their ability to cope efficiently with the stress is still limited. So the combination of these factors lead to the condition where their stress levels are high. Because if I can tell you the data from the Sejiwa, from the helpline, the majority of our clients, even more than 50%, are the younger group, started from age 15 into 23. So it really explains the situation right now. So the characteristics of being teenagers, of being younger people, which value socialization as its most important aspect in their life, is not matched to the condition nowadays, especially the safety restriction. And it produces a lot of stress to our young group. And if it's not combined with an effective coping strategies to this kind of stress, then they can easily be dragged into the pandemic fatigue, and then their willingness to do protective behaviors will also decrease by time. So it's in our agenda right now to target this young group of people into our socialization within HIMSI.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Andri. So the way of thinking, the hormonal factor, and also the prevalence in the HIMSIS data shows that the younger actually have a big impact in this pandemic fatigue. Thank you, Dr. Andri, for the answer. And for the Shafa, we have a holistic answer from three perspectives. Okay, we continue for the next questions from Katie in Bogor, West Java. This question is for Dr. Norio and Dr. Andrelia. So does Indonesia has a kind of hotline center where people contact and express and get advice from doctor or psychologist? I think it's already answered by Dr. Andri, but maybe both of you can give any big, strong explanation about this hotline. Starting from Dr. Norio.
Muted again. Okay, so I think it's good to have options. It's good to have options. There are times when you can make phone calls, and there are times you just want to chat. So if you feel like chatting, then you can download the application by the Ministry of Health. It's called Sehat Jiwa. There you can meet clinical psychologists and also psychiatrists, and then continue on from that point, whether you will need to have direct consultation or something like that. But you can also have an option with Dr. Andri's program, which is the hotline service 119 extension 8. It's good to have options.
Okay, and also we have several applications like HelloDoc. There is a psychiatrist there, and in several hospital also they provide telemedicine, right? So it is already implemented during this pandemic. Is it correct?
Yeah, you can always use the government program, or you can also go to the private programs or digital mental health like HelloDoc, HelloDokter, and Good Doctor. They all have also you can have a telemedicine, a telepsychiatry. You can do that through those platforms.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Norio. And maybe we can go to Dr. Andri about this question.
Yes, and I have a good news. The Indonesian Presidential Office, the head, had already announced that the Sejiwa service will be continued after another next year. So we should be thankful for that. Please do utilize any facilities provided by our government to support our mental health, because we're Indonesian citizens and these are paid from our taxes, right? So go for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for emphasize that program, Dr. Andri. Okay, we continue to the next question from Ani in Jakarta. Hello, Ani. The question is, how is the strategies to avoid pandemic fatigue at elementary school? Instead, keep reminding students verbally and make them aware about this new behavior at school. I think among three speakers, maybe can give any perspective from this question about strategies for the student at elementary school. Maybe we can start from Dr. Supriya Bisbarwa.
So, sorry, I didn't get I'm just trying to find the question. Strategies to avoid pandemic fatigue at elementary schools. Instead, keep reminding students. Well, one of that's well, not that easy actually at elementary school, because you're talking about really small children, and they will be frightened and also feeling uncertain in this situation, and I assume also that they have not been to school for a while, right, in Indonesia as well. So I would say, and of course my colleagues would know more here, my fellow speakers, but I would say that focusing on the positive message, what they can do, keeping them occupied also, and as she said, do things differently. That I think it's important for children at that age to be social, and if they can't meet their friends, which is how they do a lot of the learning, at least try and keep that going online as far as possible. And if possible, if they can meet, say, one friend or something, if that is allowed, sometimes focus on that. But also from the government side, speak to school authorities and bring them in the loop and say what they have to say about keeping their elementary school students' morale high, so to say. There's also various activities, go on their creative, go to their, sort of get them to let out their frustration through creative sides and all of that as well.
Okay, thank you from
Thank you.
Dr. Supriya for your perspective, and maybe Dr. Norio can answer these questions about strategies.
I think we should use several perspectives for this case. It's from the teacher's perspective and also parents' perspective. So as in school, we've been receiving reports about how the children do not feel really connected with the lessons being taught to them, because it's only a matter of catching up with curriculum. While this is an entirely different situation right now. And so they're, and they simply have this different way of receiving information when you do it remotely and if you do it directly. So it cannot be business as usual. There's got to be creativity from the school's perspective, and by also receiving informations or feedback from parents, so they will know whether they have been effective this entire year of 2020 and also this semester already, 2021. And from parents' perspective, if you talk about elementary schools, I remember when I was in elementary school, I think I played a lot, had a lot of energy, and that's why parents should incorporate, should sound very strong, but yeah, I think it's okay, not must, should. They should incorporate playing in the learning process. They should be also creative that's why I say about the burdensomeness, how the children are and the adolescents are being burdened to their parents. But I think scaling up the ability of parents to take part or to be involved in the educational process during the pandemic, then they cannot also do business as usual. So they're better if, between parents or between caregivers have some sort of agreement or collaboration, instead of making the kids get more confused in the process, so I think that's that. Use different perspective, parents or teachers' perspective, and and just to remind about the possibility of opening up schools, the direct learning again sometime in July, I guess. Safety first.
Yeah.
I think that, because I think that's very important. If it has to be done, then it has to be done very carefully and safety first, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, because the parents, the teacher must involve this case about the elementary school students. And how about Dr. Andri about these questions related to strategies for students in elementary school?
Okay, thank you. So for elementary school students, psychologically, we can use behavior and learning principles here, because elementary school students have a very concrete operational and concrete thinking style. So the systems, the method have to be concrete as well. So one of my suggestion, and it's also supported by the research, is using the behavior modeling. So you learn children by showing them what should they do. It's what you call it behavior modeling. So it then can be combined by suggestion from the World Health Organization. Dr. Besbarua also stated about self-efficacy, emphasis on the can-do attitude. So avoid punishment, but emphasis reinforcement, right? Having reward, and also emphasizing on what they actually do. If, for example, for mass usage, for example, if they cannot do it all the time during the school time, then you can just acknowledge the hardship, right? We can just ask them, like what happened? They might say something like, I cannot breathe, which is very normal, right? Even for us adults. So using the principles from the World Health Organization, acknowledging the hardship, right? It means that we really need to know what are the obstacles, right? And then go for it. Like, for example, after we do the behavior modeling, we make them imitate our protective behavior, kinds of behavior that is positive, and we think it's important for them to follow us. Do show them about this kind of behavior, and once they fail to do it, do a personal approach to acknowledge that they can actually do, and we know that it's difficult. It's never easy for the kids. So by using this kind of technique over and over again, it will reinforce the motivation first. We cannot just jump into the behavior, but we really need to touch the motivation first. Once they think that they're happy in joining this kind of system, then they will do just like what we asked to do. So the behavior modeling, I think, is suitable for this situation, combined with a can-do attitude and also a combination of positive reinforcement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the answer. And I think we have two last question or one questions because the limit of time. We have Yuriana from Jakarta. What percentage of possibility that if one suffer from pandemic fatigue and does not being treated, then he or she will mentally ill? I mean, maybe it can progress to be mental health issues or not after being suffer from pandemic fatigue. Maybe from among you speakers, maybe want to answer these questions. Maybe from the Tenorio. Yeah.
Yeah, I will try to answer. There is not yet a longitudinal research on this one, like the percentage of pandemic fatigue ending up in mental illness, but somehow every unmanaged and prolonged psychological distress might end up in mental illness. That's why it's important to prevent and to manage the pandemic fatigue in the first place. If we talk about management, then it's not necessarily have to be in the form of treatment, but more like first and foremost, it is being aware of one's mental health and then practice the healthy ways to cope with the pandemic fatigue itself. So that means emphasizing that it's the importance of long-term effort to have mental health instead of just expecting for the immediate result. So this stress management and the coping strategy, it has been explained by Mbak Andri also in her very first slides. She explained about the coping strategy and how resilience was being formed in the process. So I think that's it. Dr. Andri will continue on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Norio. Maybe Dr. Andri can answer this question.
Crystal clear. No comments needed.
Okay.
It's already clear. Thank you.
Thank you. So okay, we continue for our next questions. Maybe I choose for the question from Endah, Jakarta, Indonesia. So is there any significant correlation between personality and pandemic fatigue? How to train coping skills based on the character or personality of each individual, such as extrovert, introvert, or ambivert? Maybe we can listen from three perspectives from Dr. Supriya, maybe give any perspective from the character or personality.
In this case, I have to actually pass to my fellow participants. I am not aware of any study with correlation between personality and pandemic fatigue, but I think perhaps Dr. Nova and Dr. Andrila would know more about this.
Okay, thank you. We move to Dr. Norio. Maybe you can explain us about the character of personality.
You know what? Actually, I'm going to pass this on to Dr. Andri as well.
Okay. Okay.
No. Well, in general, every mental health condition, we always try to find out about the biopsychosocial aspects of somebody. It's just part of the I think it's past Dr. Andri.
Okay, Dr. Andri.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, the most important point would be not the significant correlation between personality and the incidence of pandemic fatigue, but we know terms like risk factors, right? Which includes also the personality characteristic, but there is no such thing like deterministic orientation who say that, for example, for those who are introvert, your possibility to get pandemic fatigue will be higher, something like that. I think it's not the way it operates, right? We do have risk factors which can include our personality characteristics, but for any kind of mental problems or mental illness, just like Dr. Rianti said, with the biopsychosocial perspective, the genes, like the biology aspect alone, can never make us to have mental illness, any kind of mental illness. It's not the way it is. right? So the biology combined with the environment then will produce some kind of mental illness or mental health, something like that. So for example, if you are introvert, but then you realize about it, and then you build your support system, you do socialization extra, like even more than your extrovert friends, even it is very difficult for you, then it means that you suppress your risk factors, right? Your protecting factors will be higher, even for those who are extroverts. Right? So it's always a combination, right? Like that. And so far, I haven't read any like specific research who prove any causal relationship, right? It should be causal relationship, right, to answer this question. So I haven't found any research that explain on the causal relationship of the specific personality characteristic to the mental illness. It's always a combination of a lot of factors which involves biological, social, and psychological aspects. Yes, so do whatever you should do your homework, do socialize, because socialization is important and we are a social human being. We got sick when we do not socialization, even for the most introvert person. Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer.
You're very welcome.
So, and I'm so sorry for another questions because of limit of time, we have to put an end to this webinar. So frankly, it was a pleasure to have you, Dr. Supriya, Dr. Norio, Dr. Andri, to join with us. Thank you for Institut Français Indonésie for creating this amazing webinar and also for all the participants. So we move to our host, Madame Myriam. Merci, bonne soirée et au revoir.
Merci Koima, merci à tous. I would like to thank everyone for participating in this event. To the speakers, dear speakers, thank you for this overall very positive statements. Thank you for telling us that in the end, it was normal to feel the fatigue. It was normal to feel tired. Thank you for giving us some elements to help us feel better and to help us understand our feelings, and especially learn how to get in touch with our emotions and with our state of mind. And you even gave us some relaxation tips, so we're really happy with that. So we learned a lot today, and we already actually have some feedbacks from our audience telling us how helpful it was for them. So thanks for your time. Thank you, Koimam, for animating this conference. It was really appreciated.
You're welcome.
And to the audience, I hope you liked the conference. I would like to tell you, please stay tuned to our social medias and to IFI website to always be informed of our upcoming events. If you want to receive an e-certificate for your participation, please fill the Google form that was given to you as a link on the chat. Well, I think it's time to say goodbye, and for all of us to get some rest. Let's not participate in the Zoom fatigue, right? Thank you. Terima kasih. Merci à tous. Have a good evening. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Au revoir.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Besbarua, Dr. Noparianti, Dr. Koimam. Thank you. Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you very much.
Miriam, thank you.
It was
for
a pleasure to
Terima
be
kasih
here.
ya.
Thank you.
Dr.
And
Andrea,
thank
nice
you,
to meet
Mom,
here.
as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And Mario.
Buat
Terima
peserta,
kasih,
terima
Dr. Norio,
kasih.
Dr. Andri. Merci.
Yes, thank you very much.
Tu peux